Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together to welcome Mr. S. Gurumurthy.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a fanboy moment for me today because I have met Mr. Gurumurthy in person for the first time in my life. Is that so, Mr. Gurumurthy? It's like you've known someone for the longest time. And for me, he has been my guru. So when you meet your guru for the first time physically, it's an overwhelming moment for me. So Mr. Gurumurthy, I can talk about what he's going to talk about, but I'd rather talk about him. I am tremendously excited today to welcome someone on stage who is firebrand, if there ever was one, a risk taker, a person with the most altruistic spirit, fierce nationalist, ferocious nationalist. And people talk in Lutyens very easily about who's an intellectual and who's not. I have no hesitation in saying that Mr. S. Gurumurthy is beyond doubt India's #1 public intellectual who is among us today. He's a thought leader and an inspiring person. So I'm tremendously excited today to welcome here, and he makes very rare appearances like this. Those who know, and I kept him for the last session because Mr. Gurumurthy rarely comes for events like this, rarely comes on panels. His influence, people talk about his influences, is spoken about. For me, he's a very influential thinker, and we are honored to have you among us here today. Formal introductions are not required for you, sir. You are the chairman of the Vivekananda International Foundation. You are a well-known India's #1 corporate strategist, political thinker, macroeconomist. You are on the RBI board. But for me, as I began by saying, Mr. Gurumurthy is truly my guru, a mentor and a guide. And he's someone who I've looked up to from the beginning of my career as a journalist. His views are dogged, persistent, and totally unpredictable. You don't know what twist he will take. But the incredible thing about Mr. Gurumurthy is, he will take a month, 2 months, 3 months sometimes to produce 2 articles. But those articles, when he writes them, are so condensed and factual in their wisdom that they are Bibles by themselves. So I called Mr. Gurumurthy. I said, sir, you please come. I want you at my event. But he set some conditions to me. He said to me, Arnab, in his own humble way, he said, I don't want to be a burden on your event. I said, sir, you please come. He said, I have been working for the last 6 months on one subject. Almost for 8 to 10 hours every day for the last 6 months, Mr. Gurumurthy has been studying and analyzing, if I get it right, and he can correct me later on stage, in a multidisciplinary way, the impact of global geopolitical trends, post-COVID, post-Ukraine, on what is going to be the future geopolitical and economic order in the world, if I have got your overall picture right. And he believes that we are in for an unpredictable future. But since I was just talking to him even before, he spoke about a silo-free world. He says that the financial system is no longer predictable. He is extremely critical of the Western capitalist model. And he just said there, and I thought it was a very prophetic thought. He said that the short-term capitalist view of the West, as opposed to the long-term view of China, is bearing fruit in some of the trends that we are seeing today. And it's going to be very exciting for us to listen to him. And Mr. Gurumurthy, fanboys should not be allowed to do such long introductions anymore. They should be told to get off the stage. So, huge round of applause. We are honored to have you amidst our midst. Mr. Gurumurthy, please sir, the floor is yours. Thank you, sir.
Namaskarams to all. You know, when you are introduced like this, the bar is raised so high. You have to really climb up and cross it to convince you that how I am introduced is worth it. You know, I was introduced as a macroeconomist. The one thing which he didn't say was I was also a journalist. I am a chartered accountant, but chartered accountants think I am a journalist. The journalists who do not want to accept me as a journalist, they call me as a chartered accountant. He called me as an economist. But you know, when we were carrying on a huge movement against the kind of globalization that had set off in 1990s, so I had taken a position that India will have to produce huge domestic energy, domestic savings. And our domestic consumption will be the core, and the global will be the additive for India. And this I have been articulating in diverse ways through researches and all that. Somebody told Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati, you are saying that India must focus on imports rather than domestic production, and it must focus on getting FDI rather than domestic savings. In fact, he went to the extent of saying India doesn't need savings. India must spend, and through that there should be growth. I mean, I was very critical of him. So somebody went and said, Mr. Gurumurthy holds a contrary view. He said, Mr. Gurumurthy, who is he? No, he is also a very well-known economic thinker. Oh, if Mr. Gurumurthy is an economic thinker, you can call me a Bharatanatyam dancer. See, this was the extent to which we were all subjected to in terms of public comments humiliating us in those days. And in fact, recently Mr. P. Chidambaram quoted this in an article in a newspaper, the Indian Express, which I used to very proudly associate with, that Modi's government is comfortable with Bharatanatyam dancers as economic advisors. You know, I study economics not from the perspective of a theoretical economist. I have my experience in the world of finance, corporates, law, geopolitics. In fact, I head the Vivekananda International Foundation, which is probably the most sought after think tank in India by people from outside, because it has put in the trust deed that we will not accept donations from outside India. That is why all the think tanks from outside India want to associate with us, deal with us, because we will be thinking independently. It was Ajit Doval's idea that we should produce a nationalist think tank which will be uninfluenced by people from outside, money from outside, politics from outside. So, we all exist for a purpose. So, from that perspective, you know my credentials now. How economists call me, it's like a Bharatanatyam dancer speaking about economics. Now you have to listen to me with this kind of negative comments, which the mainstream economists used to make about people who think independently about economics. Now, I have been asked to speak about the Indian way. You know, my introduction to the Indian way was quite accidental. being a corporate advisor, dealing with all kinds of international fund flow, investments, I never thought I would get into the Swadeshi movement. But when the tsunami of globalization started, thoughtlessly the Indian people were lured into it by the inevitability of the country being in a huge stress on the external front. We had no option but to accept whatever was said. So we needed to create an alternative opinion in the country. So I went about studying different places. I went to Ludhiana, Batala, Rajkot, Jamnagar, Morbi, right down to Thoothukudi. I studied about 30-40 industrial clusters to find out whether India has the energy to fight globalization. I mean, I knew about Bombay, I knew about corporates, how do they handle. I even deal with them. What I found was an India which Indian leadership was not aware, media was not aware, economists were not aware. In fact, I used to ask this question many audience, which is the place with the highest per capita income in India? It's not Bombay, it's not Delhi, it's not Bangalore, it's not Hyderabad, it's not Calcutta, it's not Delhi. Can you please think about it? It is a place called Morbi in Gujarat, which was devastated by a dam burst in 1965 and wiped out by an earthquake in 2001. It has 1200 textile units and almost equal number of ceramic units. It is the ceramic capital of India. And it makes the Ajanta wall clock, has an external arm to export Ajanta wall clock into America to take advantage of the MFN between America and China. You know, the one language which those people do not know is English. The entrepreneurial energy of that place, there are 4 lakh people there in that small place. More than 60% are employed. This was the revelation to me. When I went to Ludhiana, I never knew Ludhiana was such a big center. They manufacture machine tools and they export cycle spare parts to all multinational cycle manufacturing companies. Where did that technology come to them? It was because of a community called Ramgadiya community who were born engineers. Punjabis here may know whom I am talking about. Same experience everywhere. But this is not the India which you will read in the policy documents. You will see in the RBI reports or in the finance minister's reports. So a different India I saw and began thinking differently about how we have to approach the subject of economics, particularly in the context of what is the Indian way of working. So I will share some of this with you in the context of the international studies, which is very important because India is not a country which can live with itself, because 1/6 of humanity, it cannot live isolated. And it cannot be dependent on the world. Some people will say, see how the East Asian economies have grown. Whether it is Singapore or Hong Kong, or these are all countries which you can cycle across in a half a day, sometimes 15 days. India is a huge country. It cannot be dependent on the world and it cannot be isolated from the world. So we have a very difficult job to perform so far as our relation with the world is concerned. To understand the Indian way, we have also to understand the ways in which the world works and world powers work. So with this, I will take you to a small bit of history, because without history you cannot relate to the present. Actually, when the 2008 financial crisis came, many American economists felt that you have to cast aside the macroeconomics and we have to go for history of economics to know how nations, how peoples, how policies have been made. Without that background, you cannot handle the present crisis. This is one of the very sound views which were expressed at that time. You see, in 1951, the Western nations formulated a model that if the underdeveloped nations have to develop, they have to give up their philosophy, they have to give up their culture, they have to give up their way of life, and all caste, creed, everything has to collapse, and this is nothing but the Western anthropological modernity. This was the official document of the United Nations, and it was founded on Max Weber's theory that only Protestant Christian ethic can bring about development. And he wrote a book on the religion of Hinduism and Buddhism to say these two countries, India and Russia, India and China, will never come up because they believe in karma and rebirth. Only an individualist society can produce entrepreneurship. This was the base of the 1951 document, on the basis of which our sociology department, our economics department, everything began functioning. We must understand that was one-size-fit-all model. This one-size-fit-all model was recommended to all the nations, but in 1990, this one-size-fit-all model became mandatory through globalization. So they created institutions, they created theories, they created a huge amount of campaigning model against which we are fighting. When I was talking to Administrative Staff College of India, that this globalization itself is based on a philosophy which I will deal with later, that it might collapse any time because the institutional arrangement needed for globalization presumes there will be world peace forever. In fact, Francis Fukuyama, who theorized the idea of globalization, he said it is the final victory of the West over the rest. It is the best for the rest to follow the West. This was a simple formulation. Liberal economics, liberal democracy and market economics have won against the rest, and the entire world will have to be co-opted to that. And he said all conflicts have ended. We can close down the history departments, which is based on conflicts only. This was the foundation of globalization. And at that time when we were talking about, every country will have to stand on its own, you cannot really be and especially a country with 1/6 of humanity cannot be dependent on the world. We have to be on our own. When I was addressing a meeting in the Administrative Staff College of India, somebody stood up and said, people like you must be shot dead because you are taking the country 500 years back. This was the institutionalized opinion at that time. And now what happened later? I will take you through how the world order changed later. In 2008, the economic collapse took place. First, it was a recommended one-size-fit-all model. In 1990s, it was a mandated one-size-fit-all model. In 2008, it became a suspect one-size-fit-all model. In 2020, when the COVID came, it became a questioned one-size-fit-all model. After the Ukraine, it has become a challenged one-size-fit-all model. We must understand that the shift that occurred from one to the other. It was not only that. In between, in 2001, when 9/11 attack took place, the Americans felt, they need a larger forum to bring people together. So they had the G20 arrangement. In the first meeting of the G20 in Beijing in 2005, all the people consulted and passed a resolution. This one-size-fit-all model will not work. Each country will have to work out its own model. No newspaper published this in India. In 2008, the World Bank said this. In our experience, we learned the hard way because they were the people who were propagating this one-size-fit-all model for all the countries. They said, we learned the hard way, it won't work. Each country will have to work out its own model. In 2010, the United Nations, which propagated one-size-fit-all model in 1951, it said it won't work. In 2013, in the Millennial Declaration, they said each country will have to work out its model based on its own culture, its way of life, its history. Did you see anything in the Indian discourse? It was only in 2014 when this government got elected, in the Niti Aayog, the fundamental charter, Narendra Modi wrote that imported models cannot be replanted into India. You have to think of what will work in and for India. This was the statement which was overdue. It was almost a decade more. So with this, the idea of how the world moved from 1990 to 2014, so far as India is concerned, and the foundation of globalization, that there will be permanent world peace, has been disturbed by terrorism, by wars consequent on terrorism, and now the Ukraine war, and before that the COVID. So the mutual trust, which was the theoretical and practical foundation of globalization, is all but over. Today there is no global commons left. Even the SWIFT method, which is common to all, this has become a weapon in the war. Dollar reserves have become weapons in the war. Anybody can seize your dollar reserve today if the Western countries want. So now in this world, nobody can be called upon to trust anyone, and the entire architecture we have built is based on the global institutions we have built, whether it is the WTO or whether it is the Bank of International Settlement or the Financial Stability Board laying down the rules for how the bank should function in different countries with the same uniform lending model. All these are under stress, heavily questioned, heavily challenged, and so we have to now look at what India went through in this period. India was a docile player. It had no will to power. In fact, nobody even bothered about India. It was in 1998 when the Pokhran blast took place. The world took notice of India because the Indian began celebrating all over the world about India's rise as a nuclear power. And more than that, which is less noticed but more important, is that the India development bonds which the government of India issued asking for $5 billion because we were bereft of money. All the sanctions, financial sanctions, technological sanctions, trade sanctions on India. So everybody thought India would collapse in the next 3-4 months. In fact, I have heard finance ministry officials saying this government has destroyed India. I have heard this comment in my ears. But when the India development bonds was announced and the subscription was not $5 billion, $6.2 billion, when nobody would trust India with $1, that made America understand that there is something working in India. You know, one thing you must say about America, they can understand the turn. So they immediately felt that we have to engage India. Then slowly sanctions were removed. You know what was the growth in that period? Mr. Sanyal will tell you. In that 5-year period, the growth rate was average of 5.4% or so. And in that period, we posted for the first time current account surplus in 2 consecutive years. Never happened between 1950 and 2002, except for 1 year during the emergency. We posted current account surplus. And our employment generation was 16 million. In 5 years. Record. Never happened in the past, never happened later. Afterwards, we had a government which said we are having a 10% growth rate. In fact, many people say it's the golden period of the Indian economy. In 6 years, they had an average of 10% growth rate. You know what was the employment generated? 2.7 million. It was a jobless growth. The entire growth was that money came from outside. Dr. Y.V. Reddy said, don't accept this money because this money is poison, you cannot digest this money. $300 billion came into the stock market. Stock market hit the roof. It went to 20,000. And Economic Times wrote, India the superpower. Stock market going up to 20,000 is going to make you superpower? You know how many what is the contribution of listed companies to the India's GDP? 5%. The entire corporate sector, 15%. I am talking about at that time. And this kind of misnomers, misinformation, misrepresentation about the country and its energies, This was diverting our opinion. And afterwards, India was accepted as a power which could not be ignored in the international fora. And India's stature began to rise. We were part of the G20, and then we were also being thought of being invited to G7. And in 2009, one turn took place. Regularization of our status as an atomic power is a very important achievement, for which I must credit Dr. Manmohan Singh, despite the fact Sonia Gandhi opposed it. The only thing on which he protested against Sonia Gandhi and did not give in was signing the Indo-US atomic deal. Very major development. Afterwards, we went to sleep till Narendra Modi arrived on the scene. That was the third and the most galloping moment of the Indian economy. And the man's approach was very different. People used to say first generation reform, second generation reform, third generation reform. He threw all this in the dustbin. His reform was how many bank accounts the Indian people have. Do they have bank accounts? I know what discussions took place. The RBI would not allow more than 10 million accounts. The finance ministry will not say more than 30 million accounts not possible. The Prime Minister said, I want before March 2015, 75 million accounts. It happened. You know what is the tally today? 420 million accounts, out of which 380 million accounts are operating. You know what is the amount of deposit in those accounts? They said, where will you get the money? You said, you open the accounts, I know how to put the money in it. He had the DBT arrangement in his mind. This is not the reform that World Bank was talking about. This is not the reform that economists were talking about. This is not the reform that media was talking about. This is a reform which will work in and for India. You see what happened to the DBT scheme afterwards. The total amount in the accounts is over 1.5 lakh crores. It's ordinary people's money. It's lying in the bank account. This transformation and demonetization, many people at that time criticized and even continue to criticize it, but demonetization is what made the Indian informal economy formal. Today, the State Bank of India has come out with a report that the informal economy in India has shrunk. It was almost 50%, 52%. It has shrunk to as low as 15 to 18%. This happened only because of demonetization. Without demonetization, GST would not have succeeded. And it was such a tough decision to take. UP elections were coming. The whole country in distress. The Prime Minister said, please give me 50 days, I will set right everything. See the kind of leadership they had. The courage, the competence, the risk-bearing tendency. This is the transformation that took place. And afterwards, housing. We never went into housing like China did. China went into housing in the same model as the Americans, which I'll come to later. America, Europe, and China, not Japan. They all went into funding real estate for growth. And that is what I am going to deal with as to how it is dynamating the world economy today. And if you look at the world asset base, you must know that Credit Suisse is publishing a world wealth report. In 2019, the total wealth they reported is $380 trillion. Out of which $280 trillion is real estate. Out of which $220 trillion is house property. Against which the liability is $253 trillion. It's all Credit Suisse figures. The $253 trillion liability is real. This $280 trillion valuation is notional. This is the structure of the world economy. And now, after 2008, the movement forward is so dangerous. It is not being recognized by anyone. And I will take you back to 2008, when subprime lending lifted the asset prices, this did not happen accidentally. In 1980s, American economy stabilized because of control of the US Federal Reserve System over the interest rate, over the quantum of money that was in circulation. 1 year they dropped the growth, but they completely reversed the whole thing and became a very major economic power because of one man called Paul Volcker, who was the Federal Reserve chairman at that time. He was backed by the monetary theory of Milton Friedman. This combination worked wonders. You know, afterwards what happened in 1990, so much dollars went out of circulation. You know, out of the printed dollars of $2.8 trillion, 60% is circulating outside America. This was the currency. After 1990s, what happened? America began to export dollars and import goods. From 1976 till now, America's current account deficit has been $14 trillion. In 1989, if I remember right, the Economist magazine wrote an article that the most export-oriented industry in America is printing of dollars. They exported dollars and imported goods. All these dollars accumulated outside America. According to the latest Bank of International Settlement reports, the non-US banks sourcing money from non-US sources, including citizens, has 12.8 trillion lending in dollar, which is beyond the control of the US Federal Reserve System. The sovereign funds, which have accumulated huge amount of money because of the oil sales, $10 trillion, at least $22.5 trillion, which is more than the GDP of America, is in the hands of people over which the US Federal Reserve System's interest control won't work. Its quantitative expansion or contraction won't work. That is why, even when they put up the interest rates, inflation is not coming down. There is a complete contradiction. Why American economy is not responding to hike in interest rate? And it is not a big hike. It's just about 3.4% now. Why it is not working? You have to go back to what happened in 2007 when Alan Greenspan, who was called the god of money, he said, you know, it is not possible to measure up what is the amount of dollar in circulation. So we will not have normal tools of monetary management. We will have discretionary monetary management. And I must tell you something which the world has not discussed, India has not discussed, but how important it is. He said, you know, the asset price rise, you know, whether it is property, whether it is stocks or anything else, asset price rise is not an evil. It is actually prosperity. It is the commodity price which is evil. So we should focus on commodity price. We should allow the asset price to rise. The result is, today you have asset prices have risen to such an extent because of not the value of the property, because the cheapness of the money. Nil interest, low interest. So at this time when you are putting up the interest rates, a discussion came and the US, the former Treasury Secretary, Lawrence, I forget his name. So he said that it is not possible for the world to get used to higher rate of interest because the entire asset class which were based on low and nil interest rate will collapse, on which the banking system is working, non-banking system is working. The banking system is today almost equal to the non-banking or shadow banking system. The banking system lends about $180 trillion according to the FSB report, Financial Stability Board report. The shadow banks lend 142 trillion, out of which 63 trillion is lending of short-term money for long-term purposes. It can result in a huge mess. This is the global situation. Normal times it would work. We may be able to get over even normal times we could not get over the crisis which Lehman Brothers created. We are not in normal times today. Today, America is in no position to control the dollar. It is in no position to control the oil supply. There was a time when America was importing oil. It could import more, it could import less to influence the global oil prices. But America from 2019 has become an exporter of oil. It is like any other oil country. It will not be able to influence the oil prices. With this, from 1970, the game that was being played by the Western capitalist financial model of finance dominating commodities has been completely reversed by the Ukraine war. When these financial sanctions were levied on Russia, everybody thought Russia would collapse. In fact, Biden even said, ruble has become rubble. In 7 days, the situation reversed. Only on one announcement, we are not going to sell oil. So the power of oil dominated over the power of money. A very, very powerful message against the entire architecture of global financial theories, which were questioned in 2008. In fact, there was a street fight among economists. In fact, I was introduced as macroeconomist by Arnab. Economists come out with a front page cover story. The economic theory book is melting away. What's wrong with economics? Inside, the editorial said, it is not an economic crisis, it is economics in crisis. So much so, they began hitting at each other. The last 40 years, 30 years of macroeconomic research is useless at best or harmful at worst. Even today, the same theories are functioning. The debate stopped because there is no answer to the kind of problems which have been created. Lehman Brothers published a report in the 2020 annual report that the share of the banks regulated by the US Federal Reserve System in US is 1/3 of the total money that is being lent and borrowed. Where is the US Federal Reserve System's control? And our newspapers, our media, our institutions. I'll tell you, when the US put up the interest rates, our newspapers came out with a story that $100 billion will move out of India. I studied from 2001 till now. There is no correlation between US Federal Reserve rates and money coming into and going out of India. I have completely proved it. There is no correlation. Another, there is no correlation even between the difference between the US Federal Reserve interest and Indian interest so far as the money coming in and going out is concerned, because money moves seeking profit wherever it is available. It is not dependent on the interest rates. I'll tell you what happened. On 27th July, the US Federal Reserve System increased the interest rate a second time. Everybody said more money will move out of India. You know, from July onwards, we began getting money. We got about $8 billion in July and August. Did it come in the newspaper? Did any newspaper say that we were wrong? So the assumptions on which the world is working is not the basis on which the economy is working. So there is a fundamental shift in the US economy, and I will make 4 points and then I will come to what is our response, what is the Indian way. You know, 4 shifts that have taken place in the US for the last 50 years is going to dynamite the US economy. I am giving one by one. The supply chain model which were worked out during globalization has made US import dependent almost forever. It could produce money, import goods. It can never reverse it. Even today, you can see any media writing, the only way to control inflation is to bring down the duty of imports from China. You can see in any newspaper in America. Because US Federal Reserve System has lost the capacity to manage inflation. It has been managing only through printing dollars and exporting it outside and bringing in cheap goods. This has been the model for the last 20 years. Do you mean to say it can change? And you can see any number of newspapers in America saying the same thing. And they said, no, you bring down the duty from the European Union. There is no use of bringing down the duty from European Union because the European Union inflation is higher than that of America. So Europe cannot export deflation to America. So this is the situation in which the US is. Second is, state-dependent population has peaked in America. 51% of the American population is taking some handout or the other. And even more important, because two things I will tell you which will shock, and I will compare India. In 1960 in America, per household, there was 3.3 persons. Today, it is 2.5 persons. The reduction of 0.8% per household meant a construction of 32 million more houses at the cost of $8 trillion, and this added to the GDP. In India, we have almost 30 crore households, and our average person per household was 5.1 in 1950. It is 4.5 now. If 1 person per household is reduced in India, we will need 6 crore more houses. And we are promoting individual rights. We are promoting human rights of son against the father, father against the son, daughter against. This is what happened in America. We should work on civilizational policies to sustain our economy. Your law, your courts, your media, destroying the civilizational foundation of India, which makes India maintain 4.5% per household. Does anybody discuss this? The Indian way is that we will bear with difficulties, but we will be together. And that means even 1 person employed is a whole house employed. There is savings. Why India is one of the highest saving nations in the world is because we have family responsibility. We have to protect we have to safeguard our children, you have to take care of the parents, you have to take care of the elders. All these responsibilities are removed, and universal social security has been mandated in America, against which people like Milton Friedman said, don't do it. Their advice was not heeded. 1980, American economy in transition, several economists came together to discuss this. This book has been published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, America. This is one of the finest books which captures how America degenerated as an economy, in which Milton Friedman said, please don't interfere between the two generations. Let the sons take care of the parents. Don't ask them to pay the tax and you take care of the parents. You take care of the children. Forget about it. You have already taken over the kitchen through multinationals. If you take over family responsibilities also, a functionless family will cease to exist. This was the conclusion of the economists. America did it. You look at the American Social Security report today. You know, they were collecting money and paying out to people. They were collecting money from all people who were working, and they were paying out to people who could not work. The receipt was more than the payouts till 2009. Now it has reversed. Payout is more than the receipts because more people are retiring. They have found out that the present value of the future social security obligations which they have undertaken, today they need that much money to discharge that obligation, is $63 trillion. America doesn't have even $1. Let us assume if it is some other country, that currency will cease to exist. All this is now putting pressure on America. If commodity becomes dominant, the dollar will not be able to dominate the world. That is the message of Ukraine. Now, if you look at the direction in which the world is going and what we should be doing, I will conclude with these 2 points. The European Union has published a paper. It's a very important paper. I sent it to Mr. Arnab. It says by 2040, there will be diffusion of global power. The power that is concentrated now will get diffused among the nations. It's not our document, it's their document. And it will shift from West to Asia. The second point that make is, by 2030, there will be no hegemonic power in the world. And I told you about the Harvard economists who said that American dollar is not sustained by rules of economics. It is not controlled by fiscal rules, it is not controlled by trade rules, it is not controlled by monetary rules. It is backed by what is known as the laws of physics. The world, the universe is sustained by a dark matter. Dollar is also sustained by a dark matter called the power of the United States. It is not because from 1976, $14 trillion is the current account deficit you have incurred. Dollar value must have gone down to the depth, but dollar values had gone up by 3 times in this period. To which the explanation of the Harvard economist is, no. For us, economic laws don't apply. It is the laws of physics. This was the extent to which the American establishment discredited itself. And that is the money which China had $2 trillion in US government securities. They have withdrawn the money and come down to as low as $900 billion. They say they will put the money in some project which may not even fetch return, but I am not going to put it in American security because it is a suspect currency today. We must understand how the world is moving. It is not going to be led by the West, certainly not by the US. And unless we really understand where things are moving, and in 2040, E7, China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Russia and Mexico, this is called E7. The output and the GDP of E7 will be twice the output and GDP of G7. This is the documentation. We are moving into from a West-centric world to a diffused world. The world order which we talked about, that's not going to be the same. In World Economic Forum in May 2022, 2 great men spoke about the shift that is taking place in the world order. One was Henry Kissinger, very wise man. He told the Americans not to start this war. He told the Americans not to expand NATO. He told the Americans give up this Ukraine. He said, the war must end immediately, in 1 or 2 months. Otherwise, the world order will be restructured forever and permanently. And then George Soros, he said the Western civilization is in danger. These are all normal people. They are very influential people. So, the entire world order, world institutions, whether it is, nobody cares for WTO. Does anybody speak about globalization these days? No, it's over. So we are moving into a totally uncharted course, and what India should be doing on that, I'll tell you, we have to maintain our civilizational basis. Even democracy is civilizational in nature. In fact, Yogendra Yadav, he had done a research how in India voting pattern takes place. He says more unemployed people, more illiterate people, more poor people, more scheduled caste, more minorities vote in India than educated people, than higher class people, than wealthy people. India's bottom spread is strong. You look at the liberal democracies, only 40% of the youths vote, educated people only vote, wealthy people only vote, And in fact, there is backsliding of democracy in East European countries. The entire Western liberal democracy is under great stress. From 80% voting, they have come to an average of 45% voting. The liberty that you have given to the youngsters, they are making use of only to enjoy their life and not to contribute even to the sustenance of the democracy. So our civilizational democracy is growing. Freedom outside India is one of the strongest democracies in the world, despite the fact they don't accept us as liberal democracies. Indian democracy is strong because of the Indian civilizational base. Indian economy is strong because we have a strong civilizational base. As I said, if all earning Indians decide to disown their responsibilities towards people who are elder to them, 50 to 60 crore people will be standing before Narendra Modi for 2 square meals a day. Can they afford it? Indian economy is sustained by Indian civilization, Indian culture, Indian value systems. Does it come in economics textbook? Economics discourse? What is the effect of 4.5 persons per household in India as compared to 2.6 persons per household in America? If that situation becomes like in America, where will be India? And you are not sustaining it through education, you are actually promoting the destruction of the civilizational values, culture, value systems, respect for parents, elders, teachers. This is part of economic wisdom of India. The third thing is we are a non-aggressive hard power. Fortunately, we acquired hard power. No world power can ignore us. And we are an attractive soft power. And family as the social security foundation of India. Nation first approach, which has shaken the world. We had only 24 hours to decide what position we will take on Ukraine. The position we took changed the complexion not only India but also the global situation as to what a democratic power which had elected a very powerful person, and he is the top person of all the leaders. He is occupying the top position for the last 3 years continuously. It's not a joke. All this has contributed to the rise of an Indian model, a confidence as a nation. Today the foreign minister goes and tells, you are saying we are buying oil. The oil that you are buying in one afternoon, we are buying in 1 month. They have no answer. This is the Indian way. We have been subjugating ourselves. We never thought we could be self-reliant. We have now come to a position where we can think for ourselves, work for ourselves, lead ourselves, mediate and take positions. There was a cartoon published in Japanese newspaper with which we have learned. Whether it is in G7 or in BRICS or in Quad, everybody on both sides is holding Narendra Modi's hand. This is the cartoon published in Japan. So this time has come, we need to build up this spirit. And I am extremely happy that Arnab and Republic TV are the ones ceaselessly building up the Indian spirit, and I congratulate them. Thank you very much.
Sorry, can I give you the mic? That speech is a treasure, sir, and I thank you.